Hey guys, welcome. This is FineWineToMe, the wine business podcast. My name is 𝐃𝐲𝐥𝐚𝐧, and today we are actually going to Oregon. Well, I'm not going to Oregon. I'm staying right here in the United Kingdom in London. But my guest today is Dylan Walker, winemaking assistant at Roxy and Winery in Southern Oregon, and he's also national sales for them. He's a seasoned veteran. I think he told me that he sold wine in 44 states in the US, I believe, if I remember well. But anyway, before we head on, let me just run my intro and then we start the conversation immediately. Hey Dylan, thank you for having the time to talk to me. You are a seasoned veteran in wine sales, and you are an assistant winemaker at Roxy and Winery in Southern Oregon. So welcome to the podcast.
No, thank you for having me.
How did you end up in wine? Start with that, because that's the usual question.
Honestly, it was by accident. I was in the process of graduating from the University of Kansas back in 2008, and partway through my degree, I decided I did not want to pursue theater and film professionally, and wasn't sure what I was going to do once I graduated, and happened to have a conversation in the back of a beer bar right off campus with a gentleman that worked for a distributor, and topic of wine came up, and I had mentioned that I had recently a Pinot Noir from Oregon. I could not at the time remember the name of the producer, but I knew that it had a fly fishing hook on the label. And he responded that that was actually one of his products that he sold. And from there, we just chatted a little bit more. He said, I know you're graduating and you know a little bit about wine. We are losing the other sales rep for this company, and you should apply. And it was really the only job I applied for when I graduated, and I got that position it was July of 2008. And I just never left the industry. I fell in love with wine, the history, the geology, and worked in distribution in Kansas for 3 years, and then moved to Iowa when I got married and worked for a distributor there for 6 years. Though I initially, when I got hired on at that distributor, I was just a warehouse assistant manager, helping to process orders and pull orders and load trucks and unload trucks. And after about 6 months of doing that, they realized that I had a proclivity for sales. And so they created this hybrid position where I helped out in the warehouse and also helped with some deliveries, but then also ran a sales route through Eastern and Southern Iowa. Worked for that company for 6 years. And then in 2017, was hired as a national sales manager for a winery in Eastern Washington off of the Red Mountain AVA. And so I spent 3 years with them traveling the US. I called on personally about 30 states, but I would fill in some others if there were events or a need for a body to be there. And then in 2020, pandemic hit. I was in the process of going through a divorce, got laid off, and decided I didn't want to be in the Midwest anymore. I didn't want to be, at that point I was in Chicago and did not want to be there. So I loaded my car with camping gear and my dog, and I went off on this massive 2-month road trip across Western US and kept bouncing.
Everybody's dream, by the way, actually.
Yeah, I was pretty lucky. I mean, it was a rough time and a weird time to be traveling, but kept bouncing between Portland and Sonoma, California, and kept passing through Southern Oregon's Rogue Valley, and just fell in love and never left. The plan initially, when I started this trip, I was just heading out west, was going to talk to a gentleman in Sonoma about a sales position. And then there were some fires and that fell through. So I was just hanging out in Southern Oregon, enjoying unemployment, and ended up renting a room from a winemaker and viticulturalist that had an extra space, and just never left the region. I remember talking to a friend back in Chicago, telling her about Southern Oregon, and how beautiful it was, and just, there's so much there as far as even beyond wine, recreational activities.
Yeah.
We have the Oregon Shakespeare Festival there, which is pretty much runs like a 9-month theater program that is largely Shakespeare, but then also some other shows throughout the year. So it had everything that I wanted: wine, theater, and mountains and rivers. And talking to a friend and telling her about this place, she stopped me mid-conversation and goes, wait, you're not coming back, are you? And I paused for a second and thought about it very quickly, and I responded, no,
Yeah.
not. And that was, I'd say, late summer 2020.
Yeah.
And here we are 4 years later almost, and I'm still there and still madly in love with the region.
So, and then I think, well, the idea is to talk about American wine trends and how things go in the US at the moment with sales and, just generally about wine. But I wanted to ask you about the place where you work as well at the moment, Roxy and Winery, a little bit in terms of the grape varieties, what you do, and just generally, what is the place about? Is that a family winery, as far as I understand, and it's quite historic now?
Yeah, so the wine aspect of the farm came in the 1990s, but the farm itself is a historic pear orchard.
Yeah.
It was first planted in, I believe, the 1880s.
Yeah.
And then my boss's great grandfather purchased the property in 1908.
Oh, well,
And then my boss's father planted vines in the 1990s, and we had our first vintage with a Cab Merlot blend, or we called it Claret, in 2001.
Yeah, I saw the Claret on the website, and I thought, like, how can you give that name to the wine? It's such a European, old school type of name.
Well, we're actually one of the few wineries in the US that can still legally use the term Claret, because the EU wasn't a big fan of American wineries using the term Claret, and they sued the US government. And because we had been using it prior to that settlement, we were grandfathered in and are still allowed to use the term.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant. I mean, there are always loopholes here and there. And if you think about it from the European perspective, every time somebody says Claret to me, I think about a sort of mid-scale sort of Bordeaux type wine, and it's always surprising to see that name come up in an American wine. And to be honest, in many ways, I would expect that in California maybe, or something like that. But yeah, who knows?
There was the issue with calling sparkling wine in the U.S. champagne.
Yes.
And they, stopped that. But there's still, like our situation with Claret, there are still a couple of companies that can still label their sparkling wine as champagne, though most of those companies are producing very, very low quality sparkling wine. So it's not anywhere close to true champagne.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I think there's going to be always loopholes. People always try to protect their, names and heritage and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I think the US is a huge winemaking country, and it has a very big reputation as well. Obviously, Oregon, as far as I know, Oregon is probably about the third largest wine producer or fourth largest wine producer in.
I believe we are third.
Yeah.
I
obviously 90% is California, and then Washington State is second, and then I don't know if it's New York or Pennsylvania, I don't know.
And I'm not sure, and it's probably one of those that it can go back and forth year to year, depending on vintage and weather for the year.
One thing I noticed, though, you don't do Rieslings in Roxy.
Not on our property, though. I get asked about it every now and then by buyers here in the state, that asking if we still make a Riesling, because we did at one point.
Okay.
But the Riesling we made was with grapes from Washington State.
Okay, yeah. Because I'm just saying it because some of the most epic Rieslings I had are from Oregon, actually. So I think it's a big miss out on your end, but never
and then our particular area of the Rogue Valley can be broken down to about 3 distinct areas. We are on the eastern most part of the Rogue Valley, basically at the foothills of the Southern Cascade mountain
Yeah.
range. You're in the hottest, driest area there is. So
Thinking that,
Riesling is just not a variety that would do very well.
yeah,
But as you go west, you jump these smaller ranges. You jump into the Applegate Valley, which is going to be slightly cooler and wetter. And then to the west of that, you have the Illinois Valley, which is much cooler and much wetter, as it's much closer to the Pacific Ocean. And I know of some producers in the Illinois Valley that do make a Riesling Gewürztraminer that are quite good. Like they were products that when I was in distribution, I sold and was a big fan of, and thought for the price point they were wonderful wines, especially for that by the glass price point range. And so I did my best to push those products when I was still in the Midwest, by the glass options. Because when you get to buy the glass pour as a sales rep, that's
a win, because
good commission,
people,
higher turnover. Yeah,
exactly. Well, obviously you mentioned it's a smallish family winery where you work, and you, outside of this conversation, you talked to me about larger corporations, and you as a sales rep, how much struggle it is to get into restaurants or get into places with your wines if you are a small family winery. So if you talk about that a little bit, because I think it's an interesting point, not just in your part of the world, but in Europe and specifically in the UK. That's the place which I know the best. Larger groups, larger corporations obviously take huge chunks of market share, and it makes small wineries, individuals, to get into certain places a little bit more difficult, I suppose. And then I'm guessing in the US, everything is 10 times the scale of what we do here in the UK.
Well, in the US, I mean, we have a large corporate restaurant scene. So you'll have chains that are, if not all, they could be in all 50 states. And that also can encompass hotel chains as well. And so most of those decisions for their wine lists are going to be held at the higher level of the corporate office. You're not going into that restaurant and pitching a wine. You're not going into that hotel and trying to pitch a product, because they don't make those decisions. They get a email saying, here's your wine list, this is what you need to buy, and this is who you need to buy it from. And that will it's typically going to be the larger corporate producers, not just here in the US, but also from New Zealand, or sometimes even France and Italy, Australia. And so it is definitely a little more difficult for us to get placements. We have to get out and grind. And being a small family owned and operated winery, I really strive to go after similar businesses, wine shops, independent restaurants, because I want to work with people that are kind of in the same same boat as we are.
And same mindset as well in many ways, I suppose, because
and with those independents, you typically will have a higher level of knowledge. You have people that are building their business and passionate about wine and food, and so it's something that we can relate to on that front.
Yeah, and if you find a nice restaurant, if it has Michelin stars or whatever, does it make it difficult for you to go in with an individual product, like from an individual winery itself? Or would they talk to you, or would they just go with, larger groups who hold hundreds or thousands of labels at the same time, because it makes their life easier in terms of ordering or buying? Would there be
label recognition from the customer? I think when you're dealing with those, the finer restaurants and the Michelin starred level stuff, you're going to be dealing with a lot of sommeliers who are very, very knowledgeable. And I think they also at that level are avoiding those larger corporate products, because they're also going to be the ones that are on the floor of the restaurant, communicating directly with guests. And so they have the ability to sell your more niche products, your more obscure products, because they have the knowledge and the passion and the ability to communicate directly with the customer at the table, and sell them on some stranger, more eclectic wines.
Yeah, especially, I mean, if it matches with the food, obviously, why not? It's just sometimes where somebody has got stopped in the process or in the selection is because they order from X number of suppliers, they have to consider how many suppliers they can have. And then if a supplier has 100 lines already, they might just say, okay, these guys only selling their only single product. That makes my life a little bit more difficult, even though the wine is great and it works with the food.
It's one more phone call or one more email you have to make, on that weekly basis, or every 2 weeks to order. I've met a lot of restaurateurs, more so on the restaurant side, that sometimes they just prefer to work with one distributor. It makes their life easy. They make one phone call or send one email with their order, and they don't have to deal with 4, 5, 6 different sales reps coming in on a weekly basis. Honestly, when I was in distribution sales, I would try and go after accounts like that and just try and sell them on, let me just be your supplier.
Yes, let me be the one. Yes,
I've got all the products that you would need, especially when I was in distribution. I had anywhere between 2,000 and 3,000 different wines from all over the world. I can write your entire wine list, and then you don't have to deal with a whole bunch of different sales reps.
Yeah,
everybody loves a sales rep,
Yes, sometimes, yeah.
You would think selling wine, people would be happy to see you, but not always the case.
No, yeah. I mean, it's a fine line of where you annoy them and where you actually help them. I suppose that's the way. But
I mean, yesterday I was out in the market in Portland. I came up earlier in the week for Oregon Wine Symposium, which is more of a trade show for the production side of things. And that was actually my first production trade show. I'm used to the trade shows where it's actual wine product and, various wineries or importers with their table and bottles laid out, and you walk around with your glass and sample wine all afternoon. But this was really interesting because it was, a lot of barrel producers, equipment producers as far as like presses are concerned. One of my favorite things, and I talked to this guy for probably 10 minutes, I had a peregrine falcon because they do pest management with falconry here. And so got to talk to him for quite a bit, but I've got this side obsession with raptors. So when I saw that, I beelined over and had to spit in his ear for a little while.
Yeah, brilliant.
One of my favorite things at the farm is to drive around, take laps, check on the vineyards and whatnot. But I also am keeping an eye out for the various raptors that are flying around. So we regularly have red-tailed hawks. Occasionally we'll get a bald eagle or a golden eagle. I've seen once on the farm, and I'm not sure what it was. Just a week or so ago, I was taking a lap and parking at this spot that I like to look for coyotes. It's a little forested area next to our water retention pond that I know there's a coyote den inside. So I'll park and see if, they're not popping their heads out. But in the rear view mirror of my truck, I saw this, flash, behind me. And I turn and look, and I'm not sure if it was a juvenile bald eagle or a golden eagle, but it was a really big bird, and it ended up landing maybe 50 feet from me on this fence. And so I sat and watched that until it flew off. And then as it was flying off, I saw some red-tailed hawks that are living on our property chase it off. They're like, no, get out. This is our area. You're not welcome here. So it was a fun little sight to see. But that's some of the cool stuff about working on a farm, is all the wildlife that comes through. Yeah. We had last year a mountain lion.
Oh, wow.
Come through the property. So I was out on the crush pad doing some barrel cleaning, and my boss came out and called my name. And I'm like, what? I thought I was in trouble. And he goes, hey, I just wanted to make sure you had your dog with you. I have a small 20-pound Welsh Terrier. And I'm like, yeah, no, she's right here. And he goes, all right, well, keep an eye on her because the mountain lion was spotted on property earlier. And
brilliant. Yeah, you don't want to lose your dog on that. Yeah.
With the mountain kitties here in Oregon, they are big and they can be dangerous, very dangerous. But I found the orchard worker that had seen it and asked him where on property it was. So then I went out to that area and found tracks. It was the spring season, which is very, very wet. And the field it walked through was a fallow field. And so I could see the meandering tracks through this field. And I mean, these paws were,
big. Yeah.
Bigger than my hand for sure. So it was a big kitty.
Yeah, you probably don't want to meet that cat, like, very close by without a gun, because
No, and where I live about 30 minutes away from the winery. I'm closer to the California border. I'm maybe 6 or 7 miles from the border itself, but I'm up on Mount Ashland at about 3,100 feet on 5 acres in kind of the middle of nowhere. And I've taken my dog out at night and heard sounds that if you get a chance to look up cougar sounds, because on occasion they'll make this noise that sounds like a bird.
Mm.
But this was like 10:30 at night, and I'm outside with my dog, and I go, I don't think that's a bird. And so I do go out, especially when I'm out hiking. I do take a pistol with me, just for pistol and a knife, just for protection and just in case. And I
scare them off if you need to. Yeah.
Hope I never have to use it, but I would rather have the tool than not, for sure.
Exactly. Well, that must be epic. I mean, to be honest, that's real wildlife there.
That's the thing I learned about moving out west from Kansas City and Chicago, is that it is still very, very much the Wild West out here. You get up in the mountains, no one's coming to save you. That's it. I mean, you don't have cell service. And we have seen, especially over the last couple of decades in Oregon, an increase in the mountain lion presence, to where at one point they'd been hunted down to where their numbers were in 200 or so, and now they're estimating in the state upwards of 6,000.
Yeah, wow, okay.
And then we're also seeing the wolves come back. So they are on the other side of the Cascade Range from us, so on the drier side of Oregon, but it is not far from where I live, maybe 50 miles or so. And there are confirmed wolf packs in what is called Klamath County. So about 45 minutes to an hour away. Yeah.
Obviously, the question comes, you seem very passionate about wildlife, animals, and this sort of rural lifestyle. And you also do sales, and then you also do winemaking in the winery. Which one do you prefer? What would be, if you have to choose, if you have to say, like, I can only do one thing, would you go with the winemaking or would you go with sales? Because you done both a little bit.
That's hard, because I think, my ultimate goal was to have this hybrid position that I do now, because I like being on the farm. I like checking on the vines. I like, repairing the irrigation systems when there's issues. Like last summer, we had some pretty bad wildfires in the region, and the smoke had gotten pretty bad, and the smoke drives the animals nutty. They freak out. And we had several incidences where coyotes had bitten through our irrigation lines. So I would be driving around checking on things, and I would see water spraying up out of the irrigation lines because the coyotes had come and bitten it to get water, which is not typical. That they would never do that
in normal circumstances.
But I like both. I like the fact that when I need to be on property and on the farm, I'm there and doing things. But then I also like to pack my bag and hit the road and drive around the state and show off the products that I help to make. And tell the story of the family and the farm and the Rogue Valley itself, because it is such a very unique growing area for wine, such a unique AVA, or for your European listeners, American viticultural area. It's how we define things here in the U.S. And I think it's special. So I'm very, very passionate about getting out and telling that story. And I'd like to think I do a pretty decent job of it. Like I was saying, I was up in Portland yesterday, going to a couple of independent restaurants and bottle shops. And it's just nice to put these wines in front of people and know exactly what went into making them. Because I was there from bud break in the spring to when these wines went into the bottle and then into the cardboard case.
And it's probably
every step of it.
And it's probably more authentic from you as well, because you were there making it, and you don't just go around and try to sell the thing. You actually made it as well, or partly made it as well. So,
even before I got into the winemaking side of things, was always very passionate about wine and telling the stories of the winery and their histories and the details on the region where those products came from. but now it's just has that extra level of specialness because I'm right there.
Yes.
I'm going to the winery. If I'm not traveling, I'm going to the winery every day. I've got my dog in tow. She gets to go play with the boss's dog when we can take some breaks and walk around the pear orchard. So yeah, it's special. I don't know that I could choose one over the other at this point, though I didn't think I was ever going to come back to sales. I thought when I got this job as an entry-level cellar rat with zero production experience, but a dozen years of fine wine and sommelier studies, I thought that was it. I'm done with sales. I'm not going to carry a bag. I'm just going to be here on the farm. But they asked me a little over a year and a half ago, to come out of sales retirement and
back on the road.
Start slinging juice again. So it's nice. I like the balance. And then we're in the process of getting our wines outside of the state of Oregon and distribution in other states.
Brilliant. You just mentioned that you obviously worked in that sort of field where you were selling fine wine. I wanted to ask you about this because we talked about this before as well, and I think it's such a lot of snobbery in wine, in my opinion, and you probably had experience with that as well, about the wine trade. And I always say that this is one of the major problems, that people can't actually relate to wine because they sort of put off by this snobbish attitude what a lot of wine professionals have. And I'm not sure how it is in the US, but I can only talk about this in the European side. For me, it was always one of those elements which sort of stops big number of people entering into that sort of wine world. They feel intimidated when they walk into a nice looking wine shop or a nice restaurant and they have to order wine from a sommelier. And then it was a classic example when we talked last week on Zoom, and you said something about jacket or hoodies or something, and it's like, and I said, like, what do you mean you're not wearing your tie and stuff in the when you work in the vineyard? And that's exactly what
no, I mean, there is a time and a place for that sort of approach to wine. I mean, we're not going to get rid of Michelin star restaurants or fine dining, haute cuisine by any means, but at the end of the day, wine comes from a farm.
Yes,
hands down. Without farming, there are no grapes, and with farming comes your tractors and work boots. And I'm not sure how it is in the European production side of things, but there's the typical winemaker look here in the US on the West Coast, which is usually a lot of flannel, puffy vest, coat, probably some sort of like trucker hat, or that we typically get from barrel suppliers or product suppliers. Will send us swag. Got a free hat, jeans, and work boots. So either
classic. Well, it's a farm, isn't it? I mean, it is a farm.
There's a lot of mud and dirt, and I go out, especially when this springtime of year. I'll come back in and my boots are just completely covered and caked in mud, and probably 3 or 4 pounds heavier than when I went out. My truck is a mess constantly. So yeah, it's farming. We're out in the cold and the rain. We're out in the heat. We're out in, sadly, the smoke.
Yeah.
You have to get this stuff done, and it is a hands-on approach, especially on our property and a lot of properties in the Rogue Valley. We are all hand-picked. We're not machine harvested. That's the other thing with those larger corporate producers. They will grow tons of grapes on flatlands in California or Eastern Washington, and then send mechanical harvesters through to knock grapes down into the berry into their collectors. But with that also comes they're growing not for quality but quantity. So they're not concerned about flavor in the grapes. They're concerned with how much tonnage they can get and how much juice they can get, because then they can fix whatever problems may be there in production with additives, dyes. If they, their reds didn't develop enough color that they can add to get the color where they want it. They can add various tannins or acids and make those adjustments in the production facility. But I think that takes away a lot of the soul of wine.
Yeah, exactly.
I had a conversation yesterday with a colleague asking if we picked based off bricks or acid, because a lot of producers he has talked to, do one or the other. And for us, it's a combination of both, making sure that the pH and the bricks are in the right spot, but then also flavor. The bricks or pH could be, where we would typically pick, but the flavor might not quite be there yet. And so we will let the product hang for, as long as we can until the flavor is there. My head winemaker and mentor, I've heard him say many times, like the bricks are where they're supposed to be, the acid's in the right spot, but he's like, flavor's not quite there yet. I remember it was with a Cab Franc, and he goes, it's still a little too green for what I like. So let's let it sit for another week or two and see if we can't get that flavor development going a little bit more.
And in terms of, just going back very briefly about this sort of topic of snobbery, do you think that sometimes the language, what we use in the wine trade, would put people off? Or do you think, is that something what is changing right now? Because in the UK, at least, that's how I feel now. There's a lot more of that, maybe slightly younger generation of newcomers into the wine industry, slowly but surely changing the language, changing those words what we use, because again, a lot of people don't really understand how to swirl a glass. They don't know what tannins are. They don't know this. They don't know that. But if we talk to them in a normal language, which they understand, it's a little bit more inclusive. I don't know how you feel about this in the US at the moment. How is that at the moment?
I think the industry itself has done a great job of complicating an already incredibly complicated topic. Because, we're talking about history and geology, geography, weather patterns, hundreds of different grape varieties. In the Rogue Valley, we have over 70 different varieties planted in our region alone. But I have seen really, really cool efforts by various shops around the country. I remember one shop in Boston I really liked didn't have their wine separated by variety or country or state. They had it by flavor profiles and tannin profiles. So their entire set was organized from light to heavy, fruity to tannic. So they could and ask, what do you like in a wine? What do you like taste wise? And get the customer's feedback and point them in this general area that all of these wines are low tannin and fruit forward. These are going to be incredibly heavy, tannic reds. And I thought that was a really, really good approach and simplifies things,
I often see that, obviously people in the wine trade, you if you go to a tasting or anything, you immediately see somebody's holding a glass like this. Yes, they are from the wine trade. If somebody's holding their glass like this, they've never been into the wine trade.
But I like to hold by the base. Even I'm that.
But that's what I mean. It's like people outside of the wine industry, they don't understand why they can't hold it like this, and it's like it doesn't really matter. And the other thing as well, if you put ice into your whatever rosé, is like, if you're in the wine trade, it's like, wow, what happened? It's like we don't want to talk to you.
I see that all the time, especially you'll see. Actually, there's one that comes to our tasting room that she'll order Chardonnay and get a cup of ice and add a couple of ice cubes to it. But I lost my, I guess, snobbery for the ice cubes and ice when I learned that in southern France they do it all the time. I think it's called avec glacé. Because it's so damn hot in the summertime there that you get your wine and it's going to warm up in a few minutes.
And the same thing goes for things like if you put something into your wine like soda water or this or that, and people just freak out immediately. It's like, how can you do that? And how can you? Well, I'm not saying put Coke into your water or Coca-Cola or something like this. It's just like, but there are different styles how people drink it, and then who we are to tell people that they can't do this or can do that. And I think in terms of this snobbery aspect, which wine trades seems to have still sort of hanging on to it a little bit, I think another element is when we're talking about new alternative packaging formats, especially wine in can, because now it's growing in the UK, but as far as I know, in the US, it's already been quite huge. What's your take on that?
Well, I remember the first time I saw it, I was in distribution. This was maybe 2014, 2013. And it was, in fact, a producer out of Oregon called Underwood that we had been selling. And that was their new product line, was wine in a can. And funny enough, they had to, because our aluminum cans in the US are based off ounces and not the metric system, they had to go to the UK and purchase aluminum cans from and the machine that seals everything from a beer producer, because we didn't have access to 375 milliliter cans in the US. But they figured that out, and I'm assuming at this point there's probably producers here in the US that are making 375 aluminums here domestically. But I thought it was weird when I first saw it. I'm like, this is never going to take off. This is the dumbest thing ever. And I was completely wrong.
And it did, yes.
First to admit it, because there are a ton of products out there now. And I think it has its place. One, it makes wine more approachable for people who may be intimidated by it, but when they see that it's in an aluminum can, it takes a little bit of that intimidation away. But then there's also practical aspects for it. One, it's more environmentally friendly. It has less of a carbon footprint because it is a lower weight container. And in fact, I remember I was doing a market work in Arizona, in Sedona, so northern Arizona, and they have a river running through. And this account that I called on largely only bought canned wine because you couldn't take glass down to the river. They didn't want, obviously, they didn't want people breaking glass where people are running around barefoot. And so they specialized in buying just about every canned product they could get their hands on. So it does have its applications. And from my understanding, the technology has gotten a lot better. Liners for the cans have improved greatly, so the acid doesn't deteriorate the interior of it, because you have to keep some sort of barrier between the aluminum and the wine itself. Otherwise, the wine will leach some of that metallic flavor. So there's been, a vast improvement in the technology behind it. And I don't think it's going to go away. I think it'll probably only get bigger.
Obviously, not every wine will ever go into cans, because there are restrictions where you cannot do, and then there are legal requirements in certain regions and things like that. And obviously, when you go into a Michelin star restaurant, you don't want the master sommelier to come out with a can and pop it over for you and pour it into a glass.
We're still having a hard enough time with screw tops.
I think so. Yeah, I was going to say, that's
establishment. So we're not going to see it there, but for certain applications and areas and whatnot, I think it's great, especially with myself and my outdoor proclivity, being able to just grab a 4-pack of canned wine and go to the river and throw it in the cooler is a nice option.
Do you think Roxy will ever start making canned wine?
I don't think so, but I can never say never, because, like any business, we have to evolve with the times. But if, an opportunity arises, I can see that happening. One thing we do is recyclable kegs, because keg wine is a pretty big thing here in the US. And so I think our kegs are, 21 liter recyclable vessels. And that has become a pretty big thing. So especially when you're there's a lot of breweries in the US. They don't want to have bottles, but they may have an extra line or two that they can hook into
with wine.
And yeah, so there are places that there are wine bars that are only keg wine bars.
Yeah.
They only buy product that is in that keg format.
Yes, obviously, it's one of those things which people sort of always look at it as like, oh, that's probably the cheap and cheerful option, but it's actually growing and growing. And even in London, you find a lot of them now, where you walk into, again, not the Michelin star restaurants or not the fine dining areas,
Your
but
pub, your brew pub.
yes, exactly. And then you go in, and especially if they just want to have like a white and a red and maybe a rosé on tap or something like that, which is by the glass, it's not expensive, it's a fast moving product.
Less waste. You don't have
Yep.
bottles that if no one orders it, going bad over a course of a couple of days
Okay.
because it's a sealed system, and so you have less product waste. So
I think it's a no-brainer as well. And in the previous episodes, just before yours, I actually spoke to a guy who creates tasting sample bags, sort of bag in a box. And if you have time, watch this episode, because that's quite an interesting approach. It's a very environmentally friendly and incredibly useful option when it comes to shipping, when it comes to, recycling and all sorts of things. At the moment, as you mentioned, sometimes screw cap itself is a bit of a hassle for some consumers. And then when you go that much, out of the woods, and you say like, okay, well, I have wine in can, or I have wine in a keg, or if I have wine in the bag in a box, people go, wow, I don't want to do that. I just don't want to do it. So I don't know if the consumer is ready for this yet. So I think still very traditional consumers all over the place, certainly in Europe, but I believe a lot of them in the US as well, if I'm right.
well, I mean, early on, the bag and box wines were usually the cheap stuff.
Yeah.
Very low quality product and largely made by these, the larger corporate wineries. But you've seen over the last, I'd say 15 or so years, some producers of higher quality fine wine, boutique wine, utilizing those containers. And I thought it was the weirdest thing last night. Actually, I'd never heard of it. I got a fine olive oil from South Africa that is bag and box olive oil. It came in a little like kind of tube cardboard box that you pop the side out of it and pull out this little spigot, and you've got a really high quality South African olive oil. So
why not? It all depends how much you use it, because obviously if you cook every day and if you cook with olive oil, it probably goes quite quickly. In our household, it would be, a good few weeks before that goes. So, but in terms of wine in can, just go back to that very briefly, is obviously there's a lot of use cases we can think about, events where you can't take glass in, or, the beach where you don't really want to take your wine glasses or wine bottles or whatnot, on aviation industry, instead of those tiny little, plastic bottles of certain wines, you can have very good quality wine in can, and some airlines already started using them. So I think that there's a lot of options there. So it's going to be interesting to see how the future will shape around those sort of things. Where do you see, for example, from your point of view now in Southern Oregon, will many producers go into that sort of category, or will they stick to these bottles, the traditional format of creating wine in bottle?
I see a lot of news and talk to a lot of colleagues, or see their marketing. A lot of producers are looking to use either lighter weight glass or synthetic cork, because one, you have to worry about TCA with natural cork. Two, there's also issues with, are we depleting the cork forests, and is there going to be cork eventually to still have, or are we going to deplete it all? One thing I thought was really interesting, just the other day, I saw a report that the number of producers capping their wines with aluminum foils has reduced greatly by like 20% in just the last year, which, you know, on one bottle of wine, that aluminum foil isn't very heavy, but you're
When you add it up, yeah.
millions and millions of these foils that literally just get immediately cut off and thrown away. So a lot of producers are opting to have naked bottles.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, in the UK, there's one of the major supermarket chains decided to trial their own range of wines without foils, because I think, to explain very briefly, if you go into a supermarket, you don't necessarily being seen as a high quality premium wine drinker or wine consumer if you buy your wines from a supermarket here, although that's changing as well again. But certainly they are the more traditional type of consumers who buy their wines in supermarkets, and they were a little bit afraid of creating this product because that's not something what people expect when they see a bottle without a foil on it. That's not the traditional look. It's more the sort of artisanal look. And I think it went down well because they just put a very good sort of PR campaign next to it, explaining to the consumer why it is important not to have the foil on, because it's just, again, from an environmental standpoint, it's just, again, a no-brainer. And then it actually went down pretty well. And apparently more and more supermarkets are actually thinking about it, because it makes sense not to waste all that money and all that foil on the bottle of wine, which, you know, historically was there because the closure wasn't perfect. But now it is. If you work with a decent closure, then you shouldn't have any issues with that.
Yeah, exactly. I remember seeing it for the first time several years ago, a producer that I really liked, and they said they are stopping using them because it's wasteful.
Yeah,
it costs money. It doesn't really do anything, and they. I think the owner was also like, and I don't like cutting them off. Like, I don't like wasting that time. I want to just get right into my bottle.
Yeah, exactly. Makes life easier for the consumer as well. Just put corkscrew in and pull it. Well, brilliant. Dylan, thank you very much for your time. I think we talked about a few things in the trends and how things in the US at the moment, sort of compared it to the UK as well a little bit, or Europe. And well, hope everyone enjoy this episode as well. And if you guys don't forget it, please subscribe, press the little bell button and like it, and, you know, share it with the word, because that's how the word gets out.
Well,
and
if you get a chance, come see us in Southern Oregon. It's a
I would
beautiful
love to.
place.
I would love to.
You won't want to leave.
I only have 48 states in the US which I have to visit, because I already visited 2, but well, Oregon wasn't one of them. But apparently it's beautiful, and I would love to go.
No, we'd love to have you.
Brilliant. Dylan, thank you very much for your time. And guys, thank you very much. And I'll see you next time. Cheers.